All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Beautiful daf out of us today. Today's daf is Chof Gimel. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul, Eden Faith Wolf and family in memory of beloved father, grandfather, and great-grandfather Cyrus Wolf, Shalom ben Tzvi Hirsch. Also to thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Joe and Galia Berry, in honor of their 43rd wedding anniversary and successful Aliyah 3.5 years ago. Beautiful. And our Daf Yomi sponsor, Mr. and Mrs. Kiwi, in honor of Dr. Ari Elman. Quite beautiful. Meretz Hashem, Mr. Kiwi should have a continued refuah shalema, and Dr. Elman should, Meretz Hashem, have continued koach to be the Ribono Shel Olam's shaliach in the world of refuah. And we'll say with that, let us begin. So as I mentioned, today's daf is Chof Gimel 23. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem Daf Chof Beis and with Beis 22b. We have a lot to do today. We're actually picking up let's pick up in the first of the widest lines, the first wide lines of Chof Beis and with Beis 22b. So we'll say, so if you remember again, just to go back a little bit, we were focusing on the fascinating Mishnah, Machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, regarding what happens if you have pedestrian traffic through the pasim, through the diumadim, the pasiviros. So what happens again? Remember, I have my 4 L-shaped partitions that are demarcating the area around the well, transforming it from a reshus harabim into a reshus hayachid. Now the only problem is I have the reshus harabim traffic going through it. So what happens? Rabbi Yehuda says traffic must be rerouted. It must be rerouted because at the end of the day, if it's not rerouted, pedestrian traffic through a reshus hayachid fundamentally transforms it from a reshus hayachid into a reshus harabim. The Chacham saying no, that's not the case. That's not the case. Halacha l'maisa, even pedestrian traffic through reshus hayachid doesn't go ahead and convert the identity. It still remains a reshus hayachid. So we're bringing a variety. We've brought a number of cases, trying to figure out whose opinion does it reflect. So the Gemara says now, Tashma, mevuos hamifulashos beboros, b'sichnu ma'aros. So listen to this case. Now, I literally translated what it sounds like is a mavoi mefulash is a mavoi which is open on both ends. You know, classically, a mavoi is closed on one end, and then on the open end, it enters into reshus harabim. In this particular case over here, the mavoi is open on both ends. So mevuos hamefulashos biboros b'seichnu ma'aros. If a mavoi opens up, it sounds like what it's literally saying is a mavoi opens up into a pit, a cistern, or a cave. So what's the halacha? Reshus hayachid l'Shabbos. It's still considered to be a reshus hayachid for Shabbos. Or reshus harabim l'tumah. But I will say it's a reshus harabim for tumah purposes, as we spoke about yesterday. Remember again, when it comes to tumah, what does it matter if it's a reshus harabim or reshus hayachid? It's a very important distinction. The halacha is safek tumah b'reshus harabim is lahakel. Safek tumah b'reshus hayachid is lahachmir. But say just as an aside, where is that concept gleaned from? It's gleaned from sota. We'll come to it. So the Gemara says, "Beboros sagadaitcha." What does that mean? That the mavoi is actually ending up in a pit? That doesn't make any sense. Ella leboros. Rather, what it means is as follows: say that if you can imagine the image, the mavoi opens up on one side. On one side, it opens up to Rosh Hashanah. On the other side, it opens up also into Rosh Hashanah. But there's a big pit at the entrance of the mavoi. Now, there's also a small path around the pit. So you can still get from the mavoi to the reshus harabim and vice versa. You just have to walk around the perimeter of the pit. Sagat, the Gemara says, reshus hayachid l'Shabbos, reshus harabim l'tumah. So money, whose opinion does this reflect? Ilim rabban. So if you want to say it's the rabbanon, hashta umahasam denecha tashmishte amri lo asi rabim avat lei. And I remember, can't be the Rabbanan. Because Rabbi say the fact that this area remains a Reshus HaYachid, according to the Rabbanan, that's obvious. Why? Because the Rabbanan hold that even in a case where the Rabbim easily walk through a Reshus HaYachid, they still don't convert the Reshus HaYachid into a Reshus HaRabbim. All the more so where there is not an easy flow of traffic, you of course will not convert a reshus hayachid into reshus harabim. So we'll say in this case over here, where there's a pit, literally again at the entrance of the mavoi, which makes it very difficult to traverse that area. Even if the public does traverse that area, it goes without saying that according to the Chachamim, pedestrian traffic is not going to convert this mavoi into a reshus harabim. Elalav Rabbi Huda. Rather, it must be Rabbi Huda. And Rabbi say, what do you see? So, right? It must be Rabbi Huda. To which the Gemara says, Lo the Olam Rabbanon. No, in reality, it is the Rabbanon. Urashus harabim l'tuma itzrichale. And in fact, the reason why the Brisa is being brought, Rabbi say, is not really Lagabe Shabbos, but it's really being brought for its tumah ramifications to teach us this idea that halacha l'maisa, if you have an area that is traversed by the public, albeit with difficulty, even if for Shabbos it retains its Rishus Hayachid identity, for Tumah it becomes a Rishus Harabim. So the Gemara gives another case. Tashma, Shevile Beis Gilgul, Ukiyotse Bahen, Rishus Hayachid l'Shabbos, Rishus Harabim l'Tumah. So we'll say literally paths of Beis Gilgul. We'll see what this means in just a moment. Or Rashi says over here, Shvile Beis Gilgul, Malo Gavoa Uzekufahi Beretz Yisrael. So apparently, again, it's a large ascent, a large and steep ascent in Eretz Yisrael. So this area is considered to be a Rishus Hayochid for Shabbos and Rishus Rabban L'Tumah. Ve'ezuhi Shvile Beis Gilgul. What are the Shvile Beis Gilgul? Amri Dibei Rabbi Yanai, Kol She'ein Ha'eve Yachal Litol Sa'a Shel Chitin, V'yaretz Lifnei Srajiot. It's any situation, any slope that a servant could not take a sa'ah of chitin and run before an officer. So Shvile, interesting, Shvile Beis Gilgul, although it is an actual geographic area, it's more descriptive as well, which is it's any area that's so steep that a servant couldn't run with a sa'ah of wheat in front of his master. So the Gemara says, money, whose opinion is this? Which Rabbi say is another way of saying it's an area that's not easily usable. It's an area that's not easily usable. So if you have an area that is not easily usable by the rabbim, so the Brisa says such an area is Rishus Harabim l'Tumah, Rishus Hayachid l'Shabbos. So money, whose opinion is this? Ilay Rabbanon, if you want to say it's the Rabbanon, Hashta Uma Hasam Denecha Tashmishta, Amri Rabbanon Lo Asi Rabim Umevatli La Mechitzta. So again, it can't be the Rabbanon. Why? Because the Rabbanon say that even in a case, Rabbi where the Rabbim can easily use the area, pedestrian traffic does not transform a Rishus Hayochid into a Rishus Harabim. If they're going to say that in an area that's easily used, they're going to what? They're certainly going to say that in an area that's not easily used. Rabbi say, you hear that idea. Whereas the Rabbanon are the ones who are saying that even if the Rabbim have no problem walking through and accessing, and do in fact walk through and access to Rishus Hayachid, their traffic still doesn't convert it into Rishus Harabim. All the more so, an area that's not easily used will not be converted into a Rishus Hayachid through pedestrian traffic. Rather, it must reflect the view of Rabbi Huda. Amrle said, no. Shvile Beis Gilgul Ka'amrit. You're talking now about the Shvile Beis Gilgul, these very steep areas. So let's listen to this Gemara. Yoshua Oiv Yisrael Haya. Yoshua was a great lover of the Jewish people. He was a great lover of the Jewish people. And therefore, what did he do? Amad v'tikein lahem drachim usrachya. He went ahead and he instituted them pathways and public areas. Kol hecha denecha tashmishta masra l'rabim. And so Rabbi said, when Yoshua set up Eretz Yisrael, the way he set it up was as follows. Any area, any public area, easily used by the rabbim, had the status of a Rishus Harabim, or was given to the rabbim. Kol hecha delonicha tashmishta, but any area that was not easily used, masra liyachid, he gave it over to individuals. Now, both say, in this context, what it means is as follows: that when Yoshua set up Eretz Yisrael, so ultimately, again, any area which was publicly used and easily used took on the status of a Rishus Harabim. But any area which, although owned publicly, in other words, it was not owned by the public, but if it was not easily used, halacha l'mais, it didn't take on the status of Rishus Harabim. And I both say we saw that earlier on the top of the daf as well. Malos omardos shebe Eretz Yisrael in chayavin alein mishum Rishus Harabim lefi she'eni kedigle midbar. I both say in order for an area to have the status, at least of a biblical Rishus Harabim, it has to resemble the desert encampment. And just like the desert encampment was flat and easily usable, so too a biblical Rishus Harabim will only be any area that is quote-unquote flat. It doesn't actually have to be totally flat. The idea is It has to be easily usable. Therefore, these steep areas, although technically speaking owned by the rabbin, interestingly enough, do not have the status of Rishus Harabim, as that is how Yehoshua legislated. I both say that the wording over here is also very beautiful, that Yehoshua Oev Yisrael. Yehoshua Oev Yisrael. What a beautiful lashon, because also, you know, the greatest, why does it call it Oev Yisrael over here? Yehoshua did so many things. Because we will say sometimes the greatest manifestation of Avas Yisrael is your willingness to do something for someone, whether or not they're ever going to know about it. In other words, we'll say, if you think about this particular legislation, it could be most people are never going up to, what is this, Shvile, what was Lashon? Shvile Beis Gilgal. But nevertheless, Yoshua had in mind to do something for them. Sometimes, again, Avas Yisrael doesn't require that the other person even know what it is that you're doing. But sometimes just doing something with the machshava, that you love your people, you want to help your people, greatest manifestation of Avas Yisrael. Says the Mishnah, Echad bar harabim ube'er harabim er hayachid. So now, interestingly enough, in the beginning of this parak, we're introduced to the concept of paseh biraos, or diyumadin, the ability to enclose a well in order to be able to draw water. So we'll say now the Mishnah is going to discuss what type of water sources could kind of take advantage of this leniency. So echad bar harabim, whether the bar, now so remember again, we saw this already before, just to get our terms right. A bar just means a hole. It's a hole in the ground that was used to collect rainwater, as opposed to a be'er, which is a spring. So echad bar harabim, so whether you have a bar that belongs to the public, ube'er harabim, or a be'er of the public, ube'er hayachid, or for that matter, a be'er that belongs to an individual, osin lahen pasin. All of these types of water sources, so I will say bar and be'er of the rabbim and be'er of a yachid, all could go ahead and take advantage of the kula of the paseh biros. Aval bar hayachid osin la mechitza gava yutvachim de Rabbi Akiva. But Rabbi Akiva says for a bar of an individual, that you cannot use paseh biros, that you can't use the diyumadin, but rather halacha lamaisa, you have to make a regular mechitza. The boss says, just to understand Rabbi Akiva's logic. Rabbi Akiva's logic is like this. You see, in general with a bar, what we are concerned about is the possibility that the water source is going to dry up. And if the water source is going to dry up, the mechitzas are only effective when there's water. So when it's a bar of the rabbim, we assume the rabbim will be vigilant with one another. They'll remind each other. When it's the bar of an individual, we're afraid that the individual will not be so vigilant and will come to utilize those mechitzas even if there's no water. That's Rabbi Akiva's logic. So therefore, if it's a be'er or a bar of the rabbim or a be'er of a yachid, the paseh biraos work. The pasim work. If it's a bar of a yachid, the pasim don't work. That's Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava says, no, in osin pasim ela be'er harabim bilvad. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava says, no. The takana of paseh biros was only made for a be'er of the rabbin. Ulesha'ar osin chagura gavoa asar tvachim. For everything else, you will have to make a chagura. Now, chagura could mean a belt. Rashi says hekif shel chavalim. So we'll say what it can mean is like our loved wall. Remember our loved wall? You have a series of ropes that go around the area, all within 3 tfachim of each other, creating a halachic wall. We'll say the idea being that essentially what Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava says is, look, the din of diyumadin of paseh biraos was only for a be'er of the rabbin. For every other type of water source, you need to make a mechitza. Right? Whatever kind of wall you want to make, you got to make a wall. It could be a loved wall, it could be an actual wall, but it cannot be the L-shaped post. That only works for a be'er of the rabbin. Top of Chav Gimel. Amar Rabbi Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halachik Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. So we'll see what happens. So Shmuel says, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Namely, Rabbi say that the din of paseh biros only works for a be'er of the rabbim. Everything else is going to require a regular mechitza. Bam Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, lo hutshu paseh biros ela lebe'er mayim chayim bilvad. And we'll say again, they say in the name of Shmuel that they did not permit the use of the paseh biros except for be'er mayim chayim, except again for a spring of water. So we'll say, so obviously this is redundant, right? Why do you have to say that the halacha both follows Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava and make the statement that the paseh biros can only be used for a be'er for a spring? So the Gemara says, I need both statements. I'll tell you why. Tiyashmu in halacha Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. If Shmuel would have just said the halacha of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, Hava amina dirabim va'afilu michunasin. I'm going to flat Rabbi say that what Rabbi Huda ben Bava is really focused on is really that the pasei biraos only works for a water source which belongs to the public. That's the ikar. The ikar in this din is really ownership. It's really ownership. So as long as it's owned by the rabbim, even if halacha lamaisa it is not a spring, but rather it's a collected water source, halacha lamaisa it works. V'hai diktani be'er harabim, and that when it says be'er harabim, la'afuke mid Rabbi Akiva is just to exclude the position of Rabbi Akiva. Kamash malon the lo hutru pasibiros el be'er mayim chayim. Therefore, again, Abose, when it says that the halacha follows Rabbi Huda and Bava, it means to teach us that the halacha pasibiros only applies to a spring, not to collected water, even if it belongs to the rabbin. V'yashmoina be'er mayim chayim. And if it would have just said that has to be a be'er mayim chayim, hava amina lo shnad rabbin v'lo shnad yachid. I might have thought that maybe Rabbi Huda and Bava shita is everything is dependent on the water source, and as long as it is a be'er mayim chayim, even if what? Even if halacha l'maaseh belongs to the individual, it should still be okay. Kamash molan halacha Rabbi Huda ben Bava. And Abba say this is indeed the halacha that the din of pasei biraos, the din of this diyumad, the L-shaped posts, only applies if number one it's a be'er mayim chayim. We saw this already on Sunday. That halacha l'maaseh, it is a spring and it belongs to the rabbin. It belongs to the public. If these two criteria are not met, the kula, the leniency of the diyumadin, does not apply. Good. Says the Mishnah. Va'odam Rabbi Huda ben Bava. Rabbi Huda ben Bava also said as follows: Hagina va'karfeif shein shivim ama v'shirayim al. So now we're going to. So now we're transitioning a little bit away from pasibiros, from the well. We've pretty much exhausted the. Now we're bikiyim, right? We're experts in the pasibiros. Now we're going ahead and transitioning a bit to the topic of enclosed non-residential space. So remember again, we've been operating with the idea that if you enclose residential space, well, we're going to see now that if you enclose residential space, you can enclose as much space as you want. There's no limit to the amount of residential space you could enclose so as to allow you to carry on Shabbos. Non-residential space becomes a bit more complicated. So here we go. Va'od am Rabbi Huda ben Bava. Hagina, Rabbi say Gina is literally a garden. Karfeif. Now remember, we've seen this word many times. Karfeif in general is a catch-all word for any open area that's not used for residential purposes. That's what it means. It's good, but it's a catch-all. We're gonna see that as we go on. So if you have a gina or a karfeif, shem shivim ana v'shirayim al ayin ama v'shirayim. So you have a karfeif or a garden that is 70 2/3 amas by 70 2/3 amas. Hamukefes geder gavoa asarat tvachim mitaltlin besocha. So we'll say if this area of the karfeif has a mechitza, has a wall around it. Definition of a mechitza is a wall that is at least 10 tefachim high. Metaltlin besocha, you are permitted to go ahead and carry within that area. Obilvad, so I'll say with the so now what the Mishnah is introducing us to, this is Rabbi Huda ben Bava telling us that halacha l'maisa karfeif, a non-residential area. Non-residential area has a limit as to how much you are permitted to enclose on Shabbos. What's the limit? 70 2/3 amas by 70 2/3 amas. That's the square, 5,000 square amas. Right? That's the amount that you are permitted to enclose. So but not only that, so that's criteria number one, is that there's a limit on the space. Right? 70 2/3 amas by 70 2/3 amas. Number two, it has to have a mechitza that is at least 10 tefachim high. Number three, ubilvat shieheba shomirah o beis dira o shete smucha. Both say not only that, but it has to have, look at Rashi. Shomira, Rashi says, sukas shomrim, it has to have some type of hut inside of it that was used for watchmen. Ve'afagav dehukaf ledira beis sasaimu deshari tfei lo. Smucha, you're supposed to listen to this. And Rabbi Huda ben Bava's model, in order for this area to be enclosed, there has to be some type of aspect of a domicile in it. In other words, either you have to have a hut. Now, I will say, a hut is not a domicile. What was the hut used for? Literally, it was just the person watching over the field would be able to get out of the sun. That's all. It was used for shade, used for a little bit of rest, but not really a domicile. But according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, in order for you to enclose a karfeif of 70 and 2/3 amos by 70 and 2/3 amos, there has to be some element of a domicile associated with it. So either you have the watchman's hut or it's close to the city. So we'll say, if you look at Rashi, Smucha Le'ir, the whole Krova Le'beso, Daito L'shtamish Batamid Kukaf L'dir Dami. Since ultimately this karfeif is close to my home, therefore because I have constant access to it, I'm going to use it for certain residential purposes. So we'll say, so this is the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Remember this, because it's going to play a very important role in our coming sugya. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, the maximum size of a karfeif which could be enclosed is 70 and 2/3 amos by 70 and 2/3 amos. But even that is not enough. Obviously, it needs an enclosure, it needs a mechitza of 10 tfachim, but it also needs some aspect of habitation, some aspect of a domicile, either the watchman's hut, or that it's close to the city. And because it's close to the city, therefore we assume that you're going to use it potentially for your activities of daily living. Rabbi Yehuda says, this is, remember, that was Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. This is Rabbi Yehuda Stam. The Pashtos, according to Rashi, this is Rabbi Yehuda Bari Loi. Okay. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer, afilu ein ba'ela bor v'siach u'ma'ara metaltlin b'socha. Rabbi Yehuda says that halacha l'maisa, even if all you have inside of it is a bor siach u'ma'ara, which means like a water source, right? You have a cistern, a well, a cave. That's enough to allow you to carry inside of the karfeif. Again, I will say, so it appears, although we see in the Gemara, it appears that what Rabbi Yehuda is arguing on, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, is Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava requires a watchman's hut or that the karfeif be close to the city. According to Rabbi Yehuda, all you need is something of functional use inside of that karfeif and you are good to go. Rabbi Kiva says, no. Afilo ein ba'achas mikol elu metaltalin b'socha. Rabbi Kiva says, you don't need anything in the karfeif. I don't need a hut. I don't need it to be close to the city. I don't need a bar, siach, I don't need anything. Obilvad, sheyehei ba shivim ama b'shirayim, al shiva ama b'shirayim. We'll say, according to Rabbi Akiva, the only thing that matters in the karfeif is the space limitation, the size limitation. So as long as you are not more, not to exceed 70 and 2/3 amos, 70 and 2/3 amos, all you need to do is what? Make sure the area is enclosed and you're good to go. That's all. There's nothing else that's needed. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, im haisa archa yeser al rachba afilu ama achas imetaltlim besocha. This is fascinating. So Rabbi Eliezer comes along and says like this. He says, by the way, also in order for the karfeif to work, right, ultimately, again, it has to be a square. It has to be an exact square. If the length is any greater than the width, even 1 amma, thereby throwing off the square proportions, you may not carry inside of this karfeif. For both sides, take a look at Rashi. Says Rashi over here, so I'll say, even though in this case you may have diminished the width and therefore increased the length, so in other words, the proportions, right, the square footage or the square amas are still the same. Ve'ein bekula ela beis sasayim. So I'll say, so ultimately, again, according to Rabbi Eliezer understands that Chazal made very specific limitations in enclosing non-residential areas. And according to Eliezer, one of the things that they legislated was you could only enclose a square. Now, why is that? Well, we'll see in the Gemara, obviously. You could only enclose a square. And therefore, again, if it's not a square, even if again, I will say it's the same, I just want to point out, 70 and 2/3 amos by 70 and 2/3 amos is 5,000 square amos, is 2 base saw. It's all the same. We're going to see actually that the measurement is off by a little bit. We'll discuss this in the Gemara, but Vepashlas, that's all the same thing. So Relez is coming along and saying that when Chazal said that you can go ahead and enclose 2 base saw for non-residential purposes, they capped it at a square. Not only is there a square amma limitation, but it has to be a square. Rabbi Yossi Omer, no. Afilu arka pishnayim berachba metaltlim besocha. Rabbi Yossi says no, even if the length is twice the amount of the width, as long as again you're still at your 2 base sa'a amount, you are good to go. You're good to go, halacha l'maisa, and again you could carry in the entire area. Rabbi Eloi. So Rabbi Eloi says, Shamati me Rabbi Elazar. So I heard from Rabbi, it's actually the Masrach Rabbi Eliezer. I heard from Rabbi Eliezer, Afilu hi kabeis kar, that even if the karfeif is larger than 2 beis sa'ah, even if it's a kor, which is a much larger area, so you can enclose even a much larger area for non-residential purposes. V'chein shamati mimenu. Similarly, I heard from Rabbi Eliezer. So we're going to see that Rabbi Eloi heard 3 things in the name of Rabbi Eliezer. So number 1 is I heard that you could enclose a karfeif that's even larger than 2 beis sa'ah, even a kor. Next, what did I hear? V'chein shamati mimenu. Anshe chatzer sheshachach echamem v'lo irev. We'll say this. We're going to get into this. It's going to be really fascinating. We'll say again, if you have a group of people who dwell in the same chutzner, so although biblically there's no problem carrying from the homes to the chutzner, from the chutzner to the homes, because it's all Rosh Hashanah, midrabanan Chazal legislated the concept of erev chatzeros. Erev chatzeros means that the residents of the courtyard join together to create one unit, to become one unit, so as to allow them to carry from their homes to the chutzner and vice versa. What happens if one of the individuals who lives inside of the chutzner did not participate in the Erev for whatever the reason? Sheshachach echameh v'lo Erev. What's the halacha? Beis so asra milahachnis lahotzi lo. So the individual who didn't participate in the Erev, he may not bring things back and forth from his home to the chutzner and vice versa. Aval lahem mutter. But everyone else is permitted to go ahead and bring items from their homes into his chutzner, from their home into the chutzner, from the chutzner into their home, and back and forth into this guy's home as well. But so we're going to get into this sugya. It's going to be the fascinating discussion of bittul rishus, that sometimes if your person forgets to participate or wasn't able to participate in the Eruv, they could be mevatel their rishus to the rest of the chutzner. Essentially, they cede their ownership rights in their rishus, giving it up to the rest of the chutzner, allowing everyone else to be able to carry back and forth in an unrestricted fashion. Again, we'll see it in the Gemara. V'chein shamati menus. Also, I heard from Rabbi Eliezer, sheyotzin ba'arkabalin b'Pesach. I heard from in the name of Rabbi Eliezer that you could be yotze with arkabalin. We'll see arkabalin. We'll say some type of motor that comes from a palm tree. You can go ahead and use this arkabalin from motor on Pesach. V'chazarti kol tamidov, and I asked all the tamidim of Rabbi Eliezer, ubikashti li chaver, I tried to find a friend, v'lo matzasi, and I could not find. Rabbi said this is not it's not Rabbi Eliezer having social issues, but rather again, v'lo matzasi chaver means I tried to find someone else. I heard all of these rulings in the name of Rabbi Eliezer. I tried to find someone else who could just corroborate what I knew, but I was unable to find anyone else who heard these things from Rabbi Eliezer as I heard them. Okay, beautiful. We'll see in the Gemara. So we'll say, so really riveting machlokas in the Mishnah about the din of a karfeif. So again, just so we're clear, so we have, well, let's begin. So my tana diktani va'od. So we'll say, so the first thing that the Gemara is fascinated by is the style of the Mishnah. The lashon of the Mishnah is va'od amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava also said. Now then the Mishnah launches in to Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava's chumras regarding a karfeif. Because remember again, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava is saying 70 and 2/3 amas, 70 and 2/3 amas, enclosed by a mechitza. But even with that, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava requires you to have some type of domicile identity, either just the hut inside of it or close to the city. So the Gemara says, why does it say va'od am Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava? So let's say, so remember, I want to point out, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was in the last Mishnah. Right, he was the last statement in the last Mishnah, and where he said, "Ein osin pasin el be'er rab." Remember, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava said you could only use pasi biraos for a be'er that belongs to the public. So it says, "Diramai tani diktani va'od ilema mishum detani lechad lechumra v'katani achrisi mishum hachi katani va'od." So maybe you'll say very simple, because Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava is kind of rattling off the chumras. In the last Mishnah, he was machmir. He said that pasi biraos only applies to a be'er of the rabbim. And in this Mishnah, he's saying another chumrah, that an enclosed karfeif must have some type of domicile identity. So the va'od is coming along to say another chumrah of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. So the Gemara says, 1 second. V'ha Rabbi Yehuda, the tani lechad l'chumrah. But yet Rabbi Yehuda, Rabosai, also had a chumrah. Right? Rabbi Yehuda also had a chumrah in the previous Mishnah, right? To both remember again, Rabbi Yehuda was 2 Mishnayos ago. This is Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, as Rashi points out. Rabbi Yehuda 2 Mishnayos ago also had a chumrah. His chumrah was that a karfeif could be no more than 2 beis sa'ah. That's the cap. That's the cap on a karfeif. And yet again, then Rabbi Huda had another chumrah. We'll say, what was his other chumrah? His other chumrah was 2 mishnayos ago, where again, which was yesterday's daf, where Rabbi Huda said that if the rabbim walk through the Pasei Biros, you must reroute pedestrian traffic in order to maintain the identity around the well as a Rosh Hashanah. So we'll say, I had 2 chumras of Rabbi Yehuda, and yet again on the Mishnah on Chav Beis Amud Aleph, it didn't say va'od. It didn't say va'od. So in other words, we'll say, just a very simple question. Why does it say va'od am Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava? So again, the Gemara answers very simple, because Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava gave us a chumrah at the end of the last Mishnah. He's giving us another chumrah at the beginning of this Mishnah. So va'od, another chumrah. Really? So every single time you find a Tana who goes in and gives 2 chumras, you're going to use va'od. Well, Rabbi Yehuda gave a chumrah 3 mishnayos ago, and then he gave another chumrah 2 mishnayos ago, but yet in the second Mishnah, which was the Mishnah on Chav Beis Amud Aleph, it didn't say va'od am Rabbi Yehuda, to which the Gemara says, no. So the Gemara says, va'od v'ha Rabbi Yehuda t'tani lechadol chumrah v'katani achrisa v'lo katani va'od, hasam afsekua rabbanon. They both say that's because, again, with Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai, the position of the Rabbanon interrupted his position. And therefore, again, the Mishnah couldn't say va'od, hacha lo afsekuhu Rabbanon. But Rabbi say here, the Rabbanon did not interrupt Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Which Rabbi say, again, it works, look at it stylistically. Right? The first Mishnah we just discussed was at the end of Chav Beis Amud Beis, right? Ultimately, again, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava says, "Ein osin pasin ela be'er harabim bilvad." And then again, we go right into that Mishnah on Chav Beis Amud Beis to the Mishnah on Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, and it's Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava quoted both times. So there's no interruption. There's no one else interrupting with another shita. So because of that, we say va'od. To which the Gemara says, "V'chol heicha daf skor rabbanon lo katani va'od." So they tell me that any time, so I'll say, they tell me stylistically that any time you have a position that is uninterrupted by another position, that the Gemara will use lashon of va'od. Well, I'll give you an example that's not true. V'ha Rabbi Eliezer de Sukkah da'afsekuhu rabbanon bekatani va'od. But there's the case of Rabbi Eliezer in Sukkah, where both say he was interrupted by the position of the Rabbanon. Yet the Gemara still used the lashon of va'od. They both say, take a look at Rashi. V'ha Rabbi Eliezer de Sukkah. Disnan b'meseches sukkah Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yud Dalet Sulos Chayiv Adam Lechal b'Sukkah. So let's listen to this. Rabbi Eliezer holds that Allah a person is supposed to eat 14 meals over the course of Sukkot. Right? Rabbi Eliezer holds that the din of Sukkah requires you to eat 2 meals a day in your Sukkah. The Chacham say Ein l'davar kitzvah. The Chacham say no. There's no set amount to the number of meals you have to eat over Sukkot. Va'od Am Rabbi Eliezer Mishala Achal Leili Yom Tov. Furthermore, Rabbi Eliezer said, Rashi's quoting the Gemara. Furthermore, the Gemara said that Rabbi Eliezer said that whoever did not eat his meal on the first night of Yom Tov, it's okay. You could be mashlim. You can make up for it by Shmini Atzar. So we'll say, so what do you see from here? So we'll say, so you follow the flow. Rabbi Eliezer says you have to eat 14 meals. The Chachamim say, Ein l'davar kitzvah. There is no set amount. Then it says, Va'od am Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer also said that what? If you miss a meal on the first days of Yom Tov, you can make it up over the last days of Yom Tov. So you see Rabbi say a case, or Rabbi Eliezer said something, the Rabbanon, quote unquote, interrupted, and yet when Rabbi Eliezer resumed, the lashon of the Gemara was va'od. So you see over here that even when you're interrupted, you could use va'od. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, no. Hasam b'milsehu da'af sekuha. We'll say there in Sukkah, the Rabbanon didn't interrupt. It's all the same discussion. The Gemara says, "Hacha b'milsa achrisi afsekua." We'll say here the positions of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava were quote unquote interrupted with different topics. So we'll say, so essentially the Gemara says is as follows: whenever you have one Tana giving multiple piskei halacha, multiple teachings, the Mishnah will often employ the lashon of va'od as long as what? It's very interesting. As long as we've stayed on topic. So we'll say so therefore when we stay on topic, we'll use va'od. Or let me say differently. There are 2 times stylistically that a Mishnah will use va'od. Either when we're quoting the same person over and over and over, as is happening here. We quoted Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. He was the last position at the end of Chav Beis Amud Beis. He is the first position mentioned on Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. So therefore, va'od, even though they're 2 different topics, right? Chav Beis Amud Beis is Pasei Biros. Chav Gimel Amud Aleph is Karfev. 2 different topics, but same person speaking, we'll use va'od. Or the other possibility is when ultimately, again, we're on topic. When we're staying on topic and the same person is delivering multiple opinions, even if there's another opinion infused there or injected there, inserted there, we'll use vote. So for example, in Sukkah, Rabbi Eliezer says 14 meals. The Rabbanan say no limit. Then Rabbi Eliezer says you can make up a lost meal. Because the Rabbanan didn't interrupt with an extraneous subject, all the same subject, you could use vote. But by Rabbi Huda Bar Ilai, even though, again, he's commented multiple times, in the middle of his comments were other topics, and therefore he can't use va'od. Good. Rabbi Akiva Omer Afilo In Ba'echa Mikalela Metal L'Musachas. What's remember? Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, as long as the karfeif is 70 and 2/3 amas by 70 and 2/3 amas, even if there's no domicile, even if it's not close to the city, even if there's no bar siach u'ma'ara, you could carry inside of it. Says the Gemara Amud Beis, Rabbi Akiva Hainu Tanakama. Rabbi Akiva and Tanakama are saying the same thing. Ikabenahu davar muat. So we'll say the difference between them is this small amount. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says over Shebeis Sasaim Yesra al Shivim Ama V'Shirayim Riboim. So we'll say we're going to explain an interesting technicality. We're using the terms 2 base sa and 70 and 2/3 amas by 70 and 2/3 amas interchangeably. In fact, the Gemara explains, the Gemara explains that in fact 2 base sa is a bit larger, is a little bit larger. So whereas the Tanakama holds that the shear for a karfef is 2 base sa, Rabbi Akiva holds that it's 70 and 2/3 amas by 70 and 2/3 amas. So where they differ ultimately again is in a very small amount. Tisanya, Rabbi Huda Omer, Davar Muat Yesh al Shivim Ama V'Shirayim. There is a little bit of a difference between 70 and 2/3 amas by 70 and 2/3 amas and an area of 2 base saw. V'lo nasnu chachamim bo shir. The chacham didn't really give a shir associated with it. The kama shir sasayim kechatzer hamishkan. And we'll say ultimately again, what is the general shir? Ultimately again of 70 and 2/3 amas by 70 and 2/3 amas, it's like 2 base saw. We'll say, why is 2 base saw? We've been operating with this amount this entire time. Why is that significant? 2 base saw was the size of the chutzner of the Mishkan. So we'll say the courtyard of the Mishkan. Remember again, everything in Shabbos, or almost everything in Shabbos, comes from the Mishkan. So even when it comes to a non-residential area, which is enclosed, Rabbi will say, what is the paradigmatic example of a non-residential enclosed area? The chutzner of the Mishkan. And how large was the chutzner of the Mishkan? 2 base saw, right? Or 5,000 square amas. So from where do we know this? Amar Rabbi Huda Damar Kra, Ora chachutzner mea ba'ama, v'rochav chamishim b'chamishim. So we'll say, so ultimately again, the length of the chutzner was 100 amas, and its width was 50 by 50. So we'll say, so what does that mean? Its width was 50 by 50. So the Gemara says, Amra Torah, Tol chamishim v'savev chamishim. What it means to say is we're medayik when it says rochav chamishim b'chamishim. So I will say for Shabbos purposes, when trying to figure out the maximum area of a non-residential area to be enclosed, what we do is we take a square of 50 amas, and then we take another square of 50 amas, and we wrap that second square of 50 amas around the first square of 50 amas. We'll say, what happens when you wrap a square of 50 amas along the perimeter of a square of 50 amas? You get a square of 70 and 2/3 amas by 70 and 2/3 amas. They'll say that's where the shear of a karfef comes from. So we'll say, so essentially, if you go ahead and you convert the Mishkan instead from a rectangle into one square wrapped around another square, you get a square of 70 and 2/3 amas, which becomes the shear for karfef. So Pashtei Dikrab Ma'aksir, the Gemara says that's fine. By the way, what's the pasha pshat of the pasuk? So listen to this. Amar Abaye, the pasha pshat I will say is as follows. The pasha pshat is Amar Abaye Hamid Mishkan Asfas Chamishim. So remember again, the length of the Mishkan was 50 amas. So what does it mean when it says Orech HaChatzer Me'eh Ba'ama V'rochav Chamishim B'Chamishim? What does it mean when it says that its width was 50 by 50? What does that mean? So I'll tell you what it means. It means is, I will say, remember, the chutzner of the Mishkan was the courtyard. Inside of the courtyard was everything, was the Mizbeach, was also what we call, see, when we use the word Mishkan, so we use the word Mishkan in two ways. We use the Mishkan to include the entire Mishkan complex, but the Mishkan also refers to the actual structure which stood inside of the courtyard, which housed the Aron, right? Also known as the Oel Moed. So what it teaches us is as follows: Hamed Mishkan Asfas Chamishim. So we'll say, where do you position the structure of the Mishkan within the courtyard? 50 amas into the end of the courtyard. So we'll say, so essentially walk in 50 amas into the courtyard, and the front of the Mishkan structure should begin right there at the 50. So therefore, Kadeshiu Chamishim Amalafanav, we'll say, therefore, again, there'll be 50 amas in front of the Mishkan structure. So there's 50 amas of courtyard. From the time you walk into the courtyard till you hit the primary Mishkan structure, there's 50 amas of space. The Esrim Amalachol Ruach, and there will also be 20 amas of space around the Mishkan structure in all directions. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Haisa Arka. Supposed to remember again. So then we had the next machlokes in the Mishnah was as follows. Rabbi Eliezer said that if the length of the karfeif is longer than the width, even by 1 amma, imetaltin b'soch. So also Rabbi Eliezer's shita was that halacha l'maisa, the karfeif must be a perfect square in order for you to be able to carry inside of it. So says the Gemara, V'atanya Rabbi Eliezer, Omer Haisa Arka Yesra al pi shnai berach ba'afilu ama achos emetaltin b'socha. So we'll say, so again, Rabbi Eliezer said that if the length is more than twice the width, even by 1 amma, you can't go and carry inside of it. Amra Bibi bar Abaye. So we'll say what that sounds like is that Rabbi Eliezer does allow it to be a bit rectangular. He just holds that halacha l'maisa, the length can't be more than twice the width. So the Gemara says, Amra Bibi bar Abaye kitna naimas nisin yesra pishnaim berach batana inachinami. Change the gears of the Mishnah. It should say that Rabbi Eliezer holds that as long as the length is not more than twice the width, it's okay. Ihachi hein Rabbi Yossi. If that's the case, Rabbi Eliezer is saying the same thing as Rabbi Yossi. Ikabenahu ribuya diribuya. So the Gemara says, or Rabbanon. So we'll say, I'm sorry, Ikabenahu ribuya diribuya dirabanon. So we'll say the machlokes Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Eliezer is as follows. According to Rabbi Yossi, that halacha l'maisa, if possible, to structure your karfeif as a square, that is absolutely preferable. It's just that halacha l'maisa, if you did it as a rectangle, it's also okay. According to Rabbi Eliezer, even l'chatchila, it is okay to structure the karfeif as a rectangle. Good. Rabbi Yossi says, Itmar Amar Rabbi Yosef, Amar Rabbi Huda, Amar Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Yossi. So we'll say one opinion says that the halacha follows Rabbi Yossi, namely that halacha l'maisa, the karfeif could be a rectangle as well. Rabbi bar Rav, Amar Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Akiva. The halacha follows Rabbi Akiva. Now we'll say, remember again, what was Rabbi Akiva's shita? Rabbi Akiva's shita was that halacha l'maisa, as long as the karfeif is enclosed, even if there's no domicile identity associated with it. In other words, there's no hut, it's not close to the city, there's no bar, siach, or that's totally okay. So we'll say, so which one is it? V'tarvai l'kula. And we'll say, both of these statements are the kula. In other words, we'll say that we hold both like Rabbi Yossi and like Rabbi Akiva. Like Rabbi Yossi, namely that a karfeif could be a rectangle, and like Rabbi Akiva, that it need not have any domicile identity associated with it. Utzricha, and both of these statements, why? Because if it would have just said Rabbi Yossi, Hava mina adiika, Shomiro beistira, I might have thought that while it's true that the karfeif could be rectangular, but maybe it does need some type of domicile identity. Kamash malon, halacha Rabbi Akiva. Therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, the Gemara says, the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva, i.e., it doesn't require any type of domicile identity. V'yash mu'inar, halacha Rabbi Akiva. But what if just said the halacha is Rabbi Akiva? I might have thought what? Havamina, the arich the cut in low. I might have thought the both said it's only if it's square. But if it's rectangular, no. Kamash malon halacha Rabbi Yossi. Therefore, again, the Gemara tells us that halacha follows Rabbi Yossi. Where the Gemara is holding right now is that we're adopting both of these kulas. Number one, that as long as the karfeif is 70 2/3 amas by 70 2/3, 5,000 amas square, you could enclose it, even if it has no domicile identity. So it's just a big open space, not next to the city, nothing. It works. That's halacha Rabbi Akiva. And the halacha follows Rabbi Yossi, that as much as, the model for a karfeif comes from the Mishkan, and from the Mishkan perspective, ultimately we're looking at a square, not a rectangle. Nevertheless, halacha l'maisa, a rectangular karfeif will work as well. Good. So Rabbi says the Gemara goes weiter. So Karfeif, Shuyoshe Beis Hasayim. Rabbi says actually we're gonna stop over here. We'll pick up Emirat Hashem with this case, Emirat Hashem tomorrow. Shkayach Rabbi say. Incredible. All right, Chevron Zoom, Yeshikayach.